Ncuti Gatwa's premature exit from Doctor Who, almost certainly due to Disney's refusal to commit to future seasons, has left the show in a bit of a state of flux, a state of limbo, where we're not quite sure what's next for Doctor Who, when it's going to return, and in what form. And although the production team were able to make the season 2 finale a fitting end to the 15th Doctor's era in a sense, there are some plot points which were left hanging and are unresolved. So for instance, the return of Susan and her reunion with the Doctor's granddaughter from the classic series. We heard about her, across season 1, we saw glimpses of her in season 2, with Carol Ann Ford returning to the role, but ultimately it went nowhere. There are rumours that more footage and scenes were shot with Carol Ann Ford, and you can hear about them in a different video I did all about the original ending to season 2, but yes, currently nothing, which is really frustrating. There's also Rogue, the time agent the Doctor had a fling with in Rogue in season 1, who again briefly returned. We got a brief glimpse of him in Wish World, when he was in the Hell Dimension, kind of giving this warning to the Doctor, tables don't do that. Was he going to originally be reunited with the Doctor in season 3, perhaps? I'm slightly less inclined to believe this because that scene, that cameo, was shot with the episode Rogue during production of season 1, and Jonathan Groff is a very in-demand actor, so I'm not sure that they've got him back. But if they were planning to have him reunite with the Doctor, that's not really something they can do now, because, if it's Billy Piper or whoever else ends up taking over the role, it's not quite going to be the same dynamic as it was with Ncuti's Doctor. It would almost, be like the 11th Doctor reuniting with Rose. It just wouldn't feel right. But in terms of Doctor Who's ongoing narrative, perhaps the biggest plot point that's been left hanging is the identity of the Boss, a mysterious figure who's been mentioned across this current era, stretching right back to the first episode, the Starbeast. So the Meep, the Starbeast themselves, who's been recently immortalised as a rather brilliant action figure, was very intrigued to learn that the Doctor was also a two-hearted being. Upon being arrested by the Roth warriors at the end of the story, the Meep told the Doctor, "Just wait until I tell the Boss." And for basically a year after that, in the show itself, we heard nothing about the Boss or who the Boss might be. There was plenty of speculation in the interim, could it be Mrs. Flood? Could it be the Master or the Rani or whatever else? Many fans were actually convinced that Mrs. Flood / the Rani was the Meep's boss because of the outfit she wears right at the end of Empire of Death, the fur coat. People thought that perhaps she was the Meep's boss, and when the Meep was unsuccessful in completing their mission, getting off Earth, getting that dagger drive working or whatever it was, that she had basically then skinned the Meep, as we hear about in the Starbeast, this idea that the Roth warriors were skinning the Meep, and turned them into a coat. As far as we know, that wasn't in fact the case, because the whole Mrs. Flood storyline has now basically been wrapped up, so it'd be very weird to go back and say, oh yeah, by the way, she was the boss all along. No, it seems like it is some other character. But in terms of other hints and clues, there was a throwaway reference once again in episode Rogue, where Rogue talks about his work as a bounty hunter, and says that since they got a new boss, there's been a lot more paperwork. And then completely out of nowhere, in the season 2 finale, in the reality war, towards the end, when everything is wrapping up, Anita, who's returned from Joy to the World, the manager now of the Time Hotel, saying goodbye to the Doctor, and she says that, oh, they only gave me one day, I can't stay any longer, I've stayed long enough, there's far too much to do, and oh, by the way, they say hello, and the Doctor says, who does? And she says, the Boss. And the Doctor says, parking that thought, he takes it on board, and with the original plan, perhaps, he was literally going to find the solution to this mystery, find the identity of the Boss in season 3, if season 3 had been commissioned by Disney much sooner, and if Ncuti had stayed on. And the most recent allusion we've had to the Boss came from showrunner Russell T Davies in his final Doctor Who magazine column for now, released in this month's issue, where he addresses the current state of Doctor Who. He kind of admits that they themselves don't really know what's happening yet with the future of the show, but he does address some of these hanging plot points. So obviously he mentions Billy Piper and the mystery of that ending, as he puts it. He mentions Susan very briefly as well, and finally, last but not least, he says, I wonder if we'll ever find out who the Boss is, or who the Boss are. I'm still wondering who Gus is from Mummy on the Orient Express. Maybe they're the same. So currently the identity of the boss is completely up in the air. It sounds very much like this was meant to be a kind of overarching mystery for this current era and kind of specifically for the 15th Doctor, even though it was technically first mentioned in the 14th Doctor story. So I suppose from that point of view, it makes sense for it to span multiple Doctors. But it certainly seems like it was something that was meant to be resolved, in season 3 or season 4 by the 15th Doctor himself. That it was meant to be the big bad for one of those seasons, perhaps, probably for season 3, let's face it, because this plot point has been running now for like 2 years, so it's about time we got some answers. And given what Russell has said there, it's possible that he doesn't even know himself who the boss is yet, or that it's still up in the air from his point of view. Perhaps there was a plan and it's had to change, or perhaps he was still keeping his options open. We know from past interviews and things that the identity of Mrs. Flood wasn't always set in stone. She wasn't always the Rani, apparently. But then again, in the Envision commentary for the Star Beast that was released, way back when the Star Beast was released in November 2023, I'm sure there was a comment made by David Tennant where he's watching it back and he said to the producers, oh, do we know who the boss is yet? Is that going to come into play yet in the future episodes? And they say, oh yes, yeah, wait and see who it is, which kind of suggests that they did know who it was at that point, like when they were filming, season 2 basically in autumn 2023. I do wonder what the plan was or is for this, because we've already had some very big hitters returning in the 15th Doctor's era. So if he had originally continued for season 3, who would that big bad have been? It couldn't have been Omega, couldn't have been the Rani, it couldn't have been Sutekh. I suppose they could have turned away from kind of going back to all these obscure villains or slightly obscure villains and gone back to something like the Daleks or the Cybermen. Perhaps the boss was Davros or like the Dalek Emperor or something. That would have been quite fun. Perhaps it was intended to be the Master, with the whole thing with the Toymaker trapping the Master in his tooth and that tooth being picked up at the end of the giggle. That's another ongoing mystery that I think people were expecting to have been resolved or at least advanced by this point, with the reveal that perhaps Mrs. Flood or the Rani was the person who picked up the tooth. It could even have been something like Mrs. Flood picking up the tooth, but then Omega or someone else taking it from her in the season 2 finale. It could have been passed between different people, different villains. I think with all this, it's a real shame because there was clearly some sort of plan in place or some thinking about where they would go with this plot point about the boss, with the Master's tooth as well, come to think of it. And now that Ncuti has gone, now that his era has come to a premature end, okay, those plot points are still hanging and they can still pick them up, in the next season or some point in the future. I mean, with the Master thing, the Master doesn't have to return in this era. But yes, particularly with the boss, there's lots of uncertainty at the moment, and I don't think they'll drop this plot point entirely. I think now that they're kind of committed to it, they have to see it through, whether that's with Billy or someone else as the Doctor, in a future season. Depending on what happens there, it's still not clear whether she's the Doctor or not. It's just very difficult at the moment to kind of predict what the resolution or the ending to this mystery might be. We know we've got a mysterious figure who's employed various people, good and bad, across the Whoniverse in recent stories. The Meep, Rogue, Anita, and the Time Hotel more broadly, perhaps. It will still be a cool moment when one day, presumably, we do find out who the boss is, whether that be in a special with Billy Piper, or like a season with another Doctor, or like 5 years down the line, whatever it may be. It's just a shame we'll never get to see the original version of this storyline, and I wonder whether, like the ending to the Reality War, it will have to be changed by necessity, by circumstance, and we'll literally never get to find out who the boss was originally intended to be. But yes, what do you think about all this? Who do you think the boss is? Do you think the identity has changed over the years? And how do you think this storyline is going to be concluded? Let me know all of your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Please also leave a like if you have enjoyed this video and subscribe if you're new for more videos like this in the future. But otherwise, until the next one, thank you so much for watching and goodbye for now.